These slides have to go in order. I'm Jeff, in case we already missed that part. I'm one of the pastors here. We have a lot to cover. We're starting a new series today, so I got to get into it. So let's get right to it. A couple years ago, I was talking to my oldest son about, I said, hey, tell me like your like ideal spouse, like your ideal wife, when you're thinking about, you're like going forward, your best idea of a girlfriend or whatever. And he's like, okay. He starts listing off these things, kind of bullet points. He's like, she's probably got to love to surf. They'll love being outdoors. She's got to be into music, maybe play an instrument or two. Maybe she's got a little tinge of like nerdiness kind of in there too, a little bit of something that's kind of like a little bit dorky. Like he's like kind of like, okay, whatever. And he goes, she's got to like kind of have a pretty low tolerance for small talk. Kind of that's not really her thing. Maybe she's kind of a creative, nonconformist kind of artist, thinker person. I'm like, okay. And I go, you know who you just described, right? And he goes, like, looks at me like, you know her name? And I'm like, yeah, I know exactly who this is. I go, you know who you just described? You. You described you. He's like, oh. I go, your ideal girlfriend is yourself. Now, we are all our most familiar, comfortable frame of reference for everything in the world. It's just, we can't help it because we're us. We live on our own skin. This is what this is like. And our assumption then about every area of our life is that the best possible life for me is more me. The best possible life for me is always got to be more me in it. Because, gosh, if you want to talk about like having the fewest amount of like issues and conflict or whatever else, for sure, more of me is. I'm not gonna have as much conflict. I like whatever I am. I'm doing more of that. I agree with myself, right? Also, the highest degree of happiness for sure is connected to the idea of a life that has the best life for me has always got more me in it. The best life for me is always more me. Is what we think. Now, the question for us though is, where else might this kind of thinking be present? Years ago, a former professor, he's not a professor any longer, but he has a guy named Scott McKnight. He's opening his first day of class at a Christian college, and he's teaching a class called Jesus of Nazareth. Notice what he says on the opening kind of his class. He says this: on the opening day of my class on Jesus of Nazareth, I give a standardized psychological test divided into two parts, and the results are nothing short of astounding. The first part is about Jesus. It asks students to imagine Jesus' personality with questions such as, does he prefer to go his own way rather than act by the rules? And is he a worrier? The second part asks the same question of the students, but instead of is he a worrier, it asks, are you a worrier? And so on. The test is not about right or wrong answers, nor is it designed to help students understand Jesus. Instead, if given to enough people, the test will reveal that we all think Jesus is like us. Introverts think Jesus is introverted, for example, and on the basis of the same question, extroverts think Jesus is extroverted. And if the test were given to a random sample of adults, the results would be measurably similar. To one degree or another, we all conform Jesus to our image. The Jesus that we're looking for. Some of you aren't sure about Jesus, and you're like, I'll go and check this out. Maybe he came at Easter. You're like, I'll give it another shot. But some of you are like, is the Jesus, whatever it is that you're looking for, or the Jesus probably said for people, this is already your home church, which we can't really avoid. The Jesus that we're seeking and the Jesus that we're looking for, or the Jesus that we see, is pretty much like me. And we can't help it but apply our own preferences and desires to God and go, this is what God must be like. So God votes like me. For sure he does. And he hates the other political party, whoever they are. He hates them because they're crazy. But he votes like me. He's frustrated by the same stuff. In my own case, for sure, God is crazy. He loves the Lakers, and he is behind them, even though they're behind in the series. And today is a game, and it is my birthday. Let's get with the program, God. But let's just figure that out. But he hates who or what I hate. And he wants more than anything else. He wants me because he's a good God. He wants me to have all of my wants. You see, when we look at it, many of us have probably heard this expression before. Maybe we've even said it. Is that whenever we encounter something about God or about Jesus or the Bible or whatever else that we don't necessarily like, even if it's true, we tend to have a reaction that's like, well, that's not my Jesus. My Jesus, the one I have kind of got, he doesn't think that way. Or that's not the God I worship, or the God I worship who would do this sort of things, or I don't believe in a God like that because it challenges all of the stuff that I like and want to believe. You see, in essence, what we're trying to do over and over again, and this is whether you've been a follower of Jesus for your whole life, you're investigating Jesus, or you're just kind of not sure about it, in some form or another, every one of us tries to do our best to shape God into something a little bit more comfortable for us. In Romans chapter 1, here's what it says. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God. Glory is a word, the sort of sort of, how do you say this, uncontainable presence of God's goodness and presence among us. Exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles. In other words, all of what we're trying to do constantly, what these people are trying to do in this particular passage, is to reduce God to smaller and more manageable sizes. And the question we get to wrestle with today, and again, it's true across the board for the rest of our lives, is what are the implications if God is merely a better version of my best self? I mean, all of us would agree, we don't always operate at our own standard. We don't always live up to it. But really what we kind of start looking at God and going, well, God's really just a better version of my best self. That's all he is. Whatever it is that I ought to be doing, he's just going to do it, but better. What are the implications of that? 40 years ago, a guy named Robert Bella and a couple other folks, they wrote a book, and it was a huge study across America called Habits of the Heart. And it was really kind of a juxtaposing the idea of this American idea of individual freedom, which was so unbelievably ruggedly, the people were so dedicated to it, the idea of individual freedom, showing it in contrast or in sort of juxtaposed to the idea of social commitments and actually needs and loneliness, et cetera, that went along with that. In one particular chapter of this famous book, again, Habits of the Heart, the group interviews a person named Sheila Larson. And Sheila Larson explains her own, this is a chapter on religion, she explains her own religious preference. And here's what she says famously. She says, I believe in God. I'm not a religious fanatic, which is funny that she has to clarify. I believe in God, but I'm not crazy. Okay, God, it's okay. I believe in God, but I'm not a crazy person. All right, so everybody just calm down, right? That's what she says. I believe in God, but I'm not a religious fanatic. I can't remember the last time I went to church. My faith has carried me a long way. She says, it's Sheilaism, just my own little voice. Sheila's faith has some tenets beyond belief in God, though not many. In defining what she calls my own Sheilaism, she said, it's just try to love yourself and be gentle with yourself, I guess to take care of each other. I think God would want us to take care of each other. Like many others, Sheila would be willing to endorse few more specific points. She just simply says, look, the most critical component of anybody's faith, again, this is in 1985, the most critical component to anybody's faith is immensely private and immensely personal. And however it is that a person might craft it, that's actually an outflow of this kind of dependence or this longing to be a ruggedly individual person. This is sort of the outflow of the 80s. Now, fast forward to 2016. A guy named Mark Sayers writes a book called Disappearing Church. And in that, he sort of outlines the 10 sort of markers of what sort of kind of captures the sort of way of feeling in this particular society at the time. Here's what he says. I'm just going to give you the first two. He says, and this is an outflow of this idea, he says the first one is this: the highest good in society is individual freedom, happiness, self-definition, and self-expression. Now, when it comes to religion, number two, traditions, religions, and social ties that restrict individual freedom, happiness, self-definition, and self-expression must be reshaped, deconstructed, or destroyed. Now, the belief was at the time, this is 2016 when he wrote this, that roughly 10 years later, that people would have a greater sense of freedom and fullness than they've ever had in their lives because they've managed to create a society that looked like that. And what we find is not greater freedom and greater fullness in society. We actually find increased levels of loneliness and despair. That this great experiment, which we could call sort of modernity or post-modernity, whatever you want to call it, has not led people to a greater sense of fulfillment, but a great sense of emptiness. And now, this might be you. Some of us in this room perhaps, but maybe other people, but society at large, people are searching for something that they cannot give to themselves. And a lot of folks are beginning, this might be you again, who are like, look, I'm just kind of investigating Jesus. I'm kind of rediscovering it. Maybe I left the sort of idea of Jesus or the church or Christianity. And the question you might be asking is this: is the Christianity that I'm seeing, is the Jesus that I'm seeing, is this actually Christianity? Is this actually Jesus? Or is it some other version of someone else's impression of how it's supposed to be? How do I know that what I'm looking at is actually Christianity or actually Jesus? Now, roughly 300 years or so after the beginning of the Jesus movement, people began to wonder about how is it that we can describe what are the essentials of our faith? Because after, really quickly it was sort of an offshoot of this little group of people in Israel, and then it started to expand beyond that in super fast ways. And so 300 years after Jesus begins this movement, all of this sort of thing starts to get unfolded. People are beginning to wonder, what exactly makes a Christian a Christian? What is the essentials and what are the non-essentials? So in Glenn Packham's book, which is called What's a Christian Anyway, which by the way, I think we might have copies in the starting point in our lobby. But this book, Glenn's in a group of pastors that I'm in with. He's the senior pastor at a church called Rock Harbor Church in Costa Mesa. Some of you know that church. He's a PhD, he's brilliant, he's super smart. And his book we'll refer to a lot during this series. But He writes this about the early part of this sort of movement in church. This is the 4th century, so think 325. Okay, this is about what he's talking about. He says, our age is not unlike the early decades of the 4th century. Christianity had been multiplying rapidly for 300 years, with the number of Christians burgeoning from roughly 1,000 to multiple millions. It grew beyond the margins as powerful people and influential teachers began to convert to Christianity. Yet popularity was not always accompanied by credibility. While many churches kept the apostles' teachings, some had been mixing it with pagan superstitions and philosophy. So they have this basic idea of, I think there's some sort of core understandings of what Jesus is, but then they're also starting to get, as it's expanding, people are adding some other stuff to it. Traveling teachers were twisting core tenets of the faith, causing confusion. On top of that, as wealthy and powerful people became Christians, the way of Jesus was at risk of corruption. There we go. These early Christian communities needed a way to keep them tethered to Jesus and his kingdom, and they needed a reminder of the way. So in other words, as the thing begins to expand, people are looking for a solution. How is it as this people who start saying they're followers of Jesus begins to expand and grow beyond sort of a couple little house churches in this one little piece of the Mediterranean? How is it that we start actually kind of having some things we agree upon? And the solution was this. We're going to have a kind of a confession, a group confession that we can all kind of go, this is what we're about. Some of you might know it as a creed. Some of you are like, oh, I remember that band. With arms wide open, which by the way, that was the reason why if you don't know the band, that's the reason, because that's exactly what they sounded like. Right there was it. And that was a darn good impression, by the way. I don't, it's my birthday, I can say what I want. But anyway, so at this creed that they form in a city called Nicaea, they form what's called the Nicene Creed. Okay, so this is in 325, and it's really similar to some other creeds at the time, but this is the most agreed upon by 300 or so leaders. These groups get together and say, we're going to have to find a way to settle these disputes, to agree upon what it is that we're going to do to affirm the particular teaching that we're all kind of about. So a creed, essentially kind of core convictions and defining beliefs that are publicly recited. So they would get together in a mostly pre-literate society. People, have to have things they can say out loud. They memorize it and then say it out loud. So when they would gather together, like, this is what we're all about. So if you hear other things, good for those people, but that's not what we are. So they had something then to fall back upon, this Nicene Creed, which we're going to talk about a little bit each week through the series. And basically what it kind of outlined is what we could call today historic Orthodox biblical Christianity. Orthodox, small o Orthodox, not capital O, it's a different thing, but small o Orthodox. Simply, it just means, look, this is what we're going to be about. Now, to that end, some people will ask me often, a lot of times, you may have been asked this question, you might even be in one of these categories, is people will go, what about like people who say that they're Christians now, but like you guys, meaning me, like you guys, Jeff, you don't really think those people are necessarily Christians. And I'll just, like, for instance, like Jehovah's Witnesses or like Latter-day Saints, like Mormons. And the reason for that is this. Those groups would not agree to this creed. They would say, look, we don't actually believe in all of the different things that you guys have agreed upon, which means they're just simply non-historic versions of a thing, which means they're outside of the bounds of what we would call Orthodox historical Christianity. Does that make sense? So those are folks that they're actually defining themselves as something different than historical Orthodox Christianity. They wouldn't agree with what we're going to talk about. Now, for the next couple weeks, we're going to revisit it. We're going to hit the key points. We're actually going to sort of reflect on some of them. I'm going to give you the first stanza now of this Nicene Creed, okay? Some of you might know it by memory, which you're awesome, gold star for you. We'll meet you at Applebee's later for my birthday party. Okay, here we go. Now, here we go. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty is how it starts, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. That's how it starts. There's 3 stanzas. The middle chunk's about Jesus. It's got a little more detail. But here you go. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. Now, a lot of different ways to tackle this first thing. We could spend a lot of time. We could spend multiple weeks just talking about that. I want to give you just one way to start this. Now, when the Bible talks about God, specifically, one of the things I want to make sure, it just kind of goes through a couple different names, particularly in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. It gives you basically 2 names, and they're usually modified elsewhere after that. Okay, I'm going to give you those 2 things the way God is sort of characterized in the Bible. Let's start at the beginning. Here we go. Genesis 1, verse 1. We're going to go through the entire Bible today, too, by the way. No, just kidding. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was formless and empty. Let me start at the second part of that. The earth was formless and empty is another way of saying the earth was chaotic and had no definition. All of the cosmos was nothing really to have any shape or form. It is this God who gives order to things that are chaotic. That word God right there is the word Elohim. It's a plural form of the word God. You can tell the equivalent would be something like the word like deer or sheep. Like, there's a deer And then you know by context when I'm pointing to some deer right there. There's a deer and some deer. You with me? It's the same idea, right? You know by context what it's actually describing. It's not exactly the same, but you get the idea. Some of you, I know, you're like, oh, it's not deers? I know. So I'm here to give you things. Okay, here we go. Now, the first definition is that there is this God who brings order to all things that are chaotic. Secondly, skipping forward to another name of God, which I'm going to jump way forward. This isn't the first time this name appears, but you'll get where this shows up. Okay, now, Isaiah. Do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God. That's the second name, the Lord. We'll get to that in a minute. The everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. Now, whenever you see the word the Lord, all caps like that in your Bible, it's actually this right here. It's the word Yahweh, okay? Yahweh is written without, Hebrew has no vowel, so it's written like this. This four-letter name, this is a bonus. You guys get to hear it right here. That four-letter name is called the Tetragrammaton. It sounds like a transformer. It's going to come in. We're in trouble. Bring us the Tetragrammaton. Whatever. All that kind of stuff comes in. Now, it is the covenant name of God. Then when God and Moses have a conversation, some of you are familiar with the story. I don't have time to go into it. But God has a conversation with God at a burning bush. Some of you have heard this story. God tells him his name. That's the name he gives him, Yahweh. And to be fair, it's not actually even known what the name actually is pronounced because people were so careful not to say it. Right? So a lot of times in the Hebrew Bible, you actually see this version of it, the word Adonai, which just means the Lord. So when you see this, the Lord, all capitalized, it is the name of God that is intended to kind of communicate that God belongs to his people, the covenant name of God. Both of those things will matter in a second, Elohim and Yahweh. Okay, here we go. Now, one passage in the Bible, God will self-describe. He actually gives his own characteristics in his own language. He actually says, this is what I'm like, okay? And it's an incredible passage. I'm going to give you some background to it to set it up, okay? Moses has been appointed as God's leader to rescue his people who have been in captivity for 400 years. Moses leads them out of captivity after a series of incredible miraculous events into the wilderness. They famously crossed the Red Sea, left a wall of water on both sides. They're being chased by an army. That army gets swallowed up by the water. An incredible, miraculous story over and over again. In the daytime, the people are following a pillar of cloud, whatever that looks like. At night, when they're wandering, they follow a pillar of fire. In no uncertain terms, this is a miraculous occurrence. And the people have witnessed everything. They've seen God show up, thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening, up on the mountaintops. They've all seen it. They know what's going on there. They've seen God in miraculous and powerful ways. Are you with me? And Moses goes up onto the mountain to meet with God. And Moses is up on top of this mountain meeting with God for 40 days. And the people decide, after 400 years, 40 days is just too long to be waiting for our leader to come back down. So they start making other plans. With me. Here we go. Here's the story. Exodus 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron. Aaron is Moses' brother, who's been like number 2 guy the whole time. They gathered around Aaron and said, hey, come make us gods, Elohim, who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who's brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. So like this guy, Moses, whatever he was doing, like leading us all through, whatever, he's taking too long. Will you make us some gods who will go before us? We've seen Yahweh, the covenant God he's been leading us through all this stuff. We need someone who's going to take us the rest of the way. We need someone to go before us. They've completely abandoned their God. Are you with me? Verse 4. So they take all of this, they melt a bunch of stuff together, they get a bunch of their jewelry, whatever. Verse 4, Aaron took what they had handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then he said, then they said, these are your Elohim, Israel. So the people are like, these are your gods. Not the God who's been leading you, not the God who you've seen. These are your gods. These are the ones, not who will bring you forward, but who have already brought you out of captivity. They've invented a thing. This is the ones who have been rescued. This is your Elohim who have rescued you out of captivity. Isn't it good news? Here it is, this God. When Aaron, verse 5, saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. Notice how that's spelled, the Lord, the Yahweh. Whatever it is that you might imagine, there is a new covenant, there's a new God of the covenant relationship. It's the one we made. We have already had this experience with Yahweh, but here's this is actually the covenant God who was there all along, who rescued you. And the people, verse 6, they have their festival. The next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. It's a party. The word literally revelry in Hebrew is the word play. And whatever you imagine all the implications of play being, stop imagining it. It's that bad. Okay, you with me? So that's what they just went buck wild crazy party. Now, To summarize a lot of information, God brings his people out of captivity into freedom. Then his people use their freedom to remake God to fit their wants. God has rescued these people. He brings his people out of captivity and into freedom, and then his people use the freedom that they've been given by God to reshape God to fit the stuff that they want. And God, as you can imagine, is ticked. He's like really bent out of shape. He's like, really, you guys? I brought you out of captivity, and then you guys did this? 400 years, and then 40 days, you're like, I'm done, we can't wait any longer? That's what we're dealing with? And an incredible passage in Exodus 33, which you and your life group should talk about. It's amazing, but basically, Moses steps in and says, God, you can't destroy these people, which is itself like mind-blowing. But God spares his people from his own anger. And then Moses says this, he goes, I want you to show me the fullness of your presence, your glory. And God does this. He passes by Moses, and then he says this one thing about himself. This is the point I'm getting to. It's the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible. Meaning if the Bible had its own sort of, this is a little bit of a stretch, but if the Bible had its own sort of creed about God, this is the one thing they could circle back to. This is what God is like. Now, and by the way, if this is something you kind of are into, you like this idea, John Mark Comer, his book, God Has a Name, is like dead on. If you want to look at that as well, please do so. But here's the best we can do for today. Chapter 34, verse 6. And the Lord, God, passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the Lord. Now, one other thing. We get to the Lord, which is said twice here. It's the word Yahweh once again. That can roughly be translated, scholars will tell us, what I am, I will be. What I am, I will be. So this passage is God passes in front of Moses, which there's a kind of interesting sort of way that works. What I am, I will be is how he defines himself twice. What I am, I will be. What I am, I will be. This is then a determination by God to be something or someone that can only be defined by himself. One Bible commentary says it like this. Yahweh, Yahweh summarizes dramatically that Yahweh will not accommodate his nature to the vagaries of his people's commitment. In other words, the people are kind of going back and forth. Yeah, God, rescue us, save us. And like, well, you're taking too long. Now we have another God. This is saying that as God determines himself, what I am, I will be, he's not going to change to accommodate what they want him to be. He is willing to give himself to them, but they must take him as he is, exactly as he is. He will not compromise, and therefore they must not. Back to the verse. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, what I am, I will be. God is apparently not changing to become what his people want him to be, and he clarifies what won't change. And one of the most beautiful passages in the Bible. Check this out. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. He's just seen his people who have rebelled against him and said, we're going to make a God that's kind of our own shape that we kind of like, and he's forgiving them. The God is slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, sort of abounding in love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, all of that stuff. This is who God is. This is how he's self-describing. Which, to give you an idea how revolutionary that is, in the ancient Near Eastern world, the gods of the ancient Near East, not this God, but the gods of the ancient Near East, were constantly in conflict with each other. In fact, the outcome of creation, the very idea of the world that has become, is because the gods were fighting with each other. There's like all this jealous rage. Human beings are kind of this unfortunate kind of byproduct of this fighting. And then human beings end up being slaves to all of these Babylonian gods. That's how that's supposed to work. This God said, and those people always lived, that the gods were always furious with them, that were at any moment could snap. Here's how God defines himself. Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. That is an unheard of kind of idea. It's a radical departure. The people were constantly worrying in the ancient world about agitating gods who were quick to anger. And this God says, no, I'm slow to anger. But it doesn't mean that he has no anger. And this is where a lot of us 21st century Southern California folks get a little bit like, this is where we start saying, that's not my God. Check this out. Get tough. Here we go. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished, and he punishes the children and their children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation. Now, to that we go, that's not fair. That's not my God. And I just want to say a couple of things. And people have PhDs discussing this particular portion of the Bible, which I do not have that. So I'm just going to do my best with this, okay? So bear with me. But I want to make sure we're all clear about a particular thing. This, first of all, remember, the Bible is written for us, but it is not written to us. Meaning, it's not designed for people who live with iPhones, who live in the 21st century in Southern California, who have lived the lives that we've lived. It's designed for ancient Near Eastern people, which means there's a lot of cultural stuff that's in this. That said, it is not a loving God who lets everything just be okay. We live in a society that says the best example of love is everything has to be okay. That must be the way it goes. And we're seeing now the breakdown of what that looks like. But that's not actually a loving God. In fact, let me try to give you another version of this. All of us in this room, surprise, we've all done some wrong stuff. Just want to break it to you right now. Every one of us has done some things that's wrong. And we've also, in a real practical sense, have been wronged. Right? People have hurt us. They've done things that are not okay. Some of them are egregious. They've been really terrible. And for the stuff that we've done wrong, we want mercy. And God says, I'm forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. But what about those people that have wronged us? Well, we want justice for them. And the truth is that we're both. And somehow or another, this God of the universe, whose understanding no one can fathom, as the Bible says, this God can hold both things. He can be both merciful and just at the same time. And his love sort of self-defines as needing both of those things. We want mercy for us, and we want justice for them. And they want mercy for them and justice for us, because we've wronged some people too. Are you with me? It's a little bit confusing. I get that. And like I said, I don't have a PhD to make that just easily smoothed out. But this is one of the great things that God is God and we aren't, right? So what do we do with that? Let's at least fill in this blank here. A Christian is. Okay, now what I'm going to show you next is going to be one of the most shocking things you've ever seen. As if we haven't gotten shocking already. This is one of those things, buckle your seatbelt, try to relax a little bit, because here it comes. Brace yourselves for this. Shocking stuff you're going to hear in church. Ready? A Christian is someone who believes in God. I had to say it. I had to go right there. I know. Yeah, I know. Shocking. Okay, now, I don't want you to dismiss this, though. It's really important. And by the way, Glenn Packiam in his book, What's a Christian Anyways, has a great chapter on this. But let me just kind of briefly give you the idea. Christian is someone who believes in God. What's important to think about is a lot of times people talk about faith and they'll describe what the kind of characteristics of what God is like. A Christian believes that God is, and they'll use all the omni words, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. He's everywhere, he knows everything, he's all powerful. That's kind of the idea that's information about God, right? But this idea of a Christian believes in God is different, because a Christian believes that God is simply about knowledge. I believe that God is some particular things. That's knowledge. But when we talk about the idea of believing in God, that's important, but believing in God is about trust. And here's what I mean. I believe, and I have absolute 100% conviction that parachutes work. I believe that they work. I've seen them. I've been at a sporting event. Someone, they had like a parachute team land. Some of you guys are Marines. You guys jump out of planes, one day. I believe that you can do it. But if someone said to me, here's your parachute, now jump out of this plane, all of a sudden I'm being asked to believe in parachutes. Are you with me in the difference? You've seen those guys, by the way, who, like, if you're down at the beach, it's always in the summer, those guys they fly out with their little paragliders. You know what I'm talking about? You've seen it before, where they're like fly around. How much of you just wishes they would just fall into the water? Not be hurt, but just like, oh, engine failure, and they just glide themselves into the water, and it's like, anyway, and if you're one of those people who has one of those things, I hope you land in the water. Don't worry, you have a parachute, nothing's going to happen to you, right? But you get the idea, right? You with me? Come back. You get the idea. There is a big difference between believing that parachutes work and actually having to believe in a parachute. This is what's being described here, right? So it's not just simply that we believe that God is, or that there is a God, it's believing in God. That's a different kind of idea. Now, according to the Bible, this God is gracious and compassionate, and he cannot be manipulated or reduced or tamed. God is as God will be. And the tendency for everyone, this isn't just for some people, the tendency for everyone is to find a way to make an unchanging God change for us, always. That's our tendency. Now, if that's the case, if my wants always lead me to the best life, which, let's be clear, have our wants always led us to the best possible life? Can we all agree that's not always the case? But if we just want to stay with this as an example then, If my wants always lead me to the best possible kind of life, then everything ought to revolve around my wants. The whole world, the universe, everything, all of whatever, everything might happen in the world. If my wants always lead me to the best life, then everything in the world ought to revolve around my wants. To use some contemporary language to kind of put a finer point on this, you might have heard it said this way, that people are often doing their best to, quote, manifest to the universe a particular possible outcome. Right? You probably heard it spoken that way. In other words, life gets boiled down, in this situation, life gets boiled down to a particular kind of technique to get what I cannot control to be controlled by me. To be fair, also, I want to make sure we're clear. I'm not saying the universe and God are one and the same. I'm just saying that this is how a lot of people talk right now. Maybe you've actually used this language, or you've heard about it before. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to manifest it to the universe. The idea is then it's just a matter of technique to try to figure out how to get what I want, and that's way different than prayer. Prayer is not the same thing as manifesting at all. Prayer is placing ourselves in humility underneath the God of the universe, not trying to manipulate or control the God of the universe. But, again, to go back to this, if my wants always lead me to the best life, then it makes sense that I would try to get everything that God made, everything that God is, to revolve around my wants. You see, when it comes to faith, the highest authority is always God. That's the highest thing. The most authoritative figure in a particular faith is always God. And manipulating God means that I become the authority, which means really at that point I'm competing with God. There are two gods that are competing for supremacy in my life. So what do we do? We have to come to grips with the fact that my wants don't always lead me to the best life. And if my wants don't always lead me to the best life, then I ought to revolve myself around something other than my wants. This is a massively countercultural message, by the way. But if my wants don't always lead me to the best life, then I ought to revolve myself around something other than my wants. And that's the question we have to kind of begin to start pressing into a little bit. Because what we're asking today, and this is a question, again, whether you're a person who's been following Jesus your entire life, you've had it modeled for you by your parents, you have a commitment to faith in Jesus, the Bible, whatever, or someone who's like, I'm not sure about Jesus or whatever the heck you're talking about. I'm still trying to get over Easter and the resurrection. What's that about? And I haven't crossed that bridge yet. I get it. But here's the question everybody has to wrestle with. Which God do I believe in? And by that I mean not which of the different faith traditions do I believe in. I mean it more specifically to this context today, is which God do I believe in? A God of my design? A God that's been shaped, bent, kind of tamed, domesticated to kind of fit what I want it to be or him to be, that I might be able to get it to do whatever I want, or something else. Because the God of my design really, really is like, man, that God is very petty. Because he likes that, he's wanting people to crash their, whatever those things are in the ocean. That's the kind of God. I want a God who does that. I want a God who always agrees with what I think about politically. I want a God who believes that everything that I want is probably something I should have. I want a God who tells me you should do whatever you want with all the stuff that you've got. Take it, acquire more things, get more things, be more greedy, be less generous, be right, defend your turf. Attack people who would try to challenge you. That's the God I want. That's the God of my design. I want God to stand with me in that situation. Which God do I believe in? Which God do you believe in? Is it a God of your own design, or is it the God who is as he will be? This is the everyday, every morning, get up and try to figure out what it is that you will revolve your life around. Is it that we're trying to figure out, and everybody has this, that we're trying to figure out how to get God to revolve around me? Or maybe that I ought to try to figure out how to revolve my life around him. Which God do you believe in? Let's pray together. Jesus, as we consider all of the small gods we've made, that we've attempted to bend around our own sort of longing and desire and wants, Father, we just confess to you right now that our own wants have taken us to places that we wish they didn't. We have regret and we have sorrow about some of those things. And Father, there are people in our lives whose own wants have taken them in places that have harmed us. And so Jesus, in this moment, as best as we know how, we at least confess that our own wants are not big enough or powerful enough or good enough to be our own God. And so Jesus, we come before you, the maker of heavens and earth, the God of the universe. the one God, the Father Almighty. And we humbly submit ourselves before you as best as we know how. So Jesus, as we get a moment to respond in song, would you hear our words of confession and prayer and response? And so Jesus, it's in your name that we pray. Amen.